Hello and welcome to Code with JV AI Snapshot number 14. It has been a big week. There's a bunch to cover. I'm going to stick with the format of least technical stuff at the front, more technical stuff at the end, so feel free to check out whenever you like. There's a bunch of interesting stuff this week, but I think it's the implications of that stuff and the thinking about the consequences of it that's really got me intrigued. Let's dive in. OpenAI last Friday, they put out this blog post, fired Sam Altman, probably heard a little bit about it. Short notice, he's gone, some reasons. This upset a whole bunch of OpenAI's investors, and so it was a hectic weekend. On the end of the weekend or Monday, you get this statement out of, hey, Sam Altman and Greg Brockman, Sam got kicked out, Greg resigned, they're going to go to Microsoft. They're setting up a new team there. They're going with Satya. Rumors are a bunch of OpenAI staff are going to go with them. The board had the legal power to fire Sam, but they didn't really have the financial power. This would have gutted OpenAI and had significant ramifications on the business. 2 days later, hey, they've reached an agreement, Sam's staying, the board's being replaced. In between that time was essentially a letter from OpenAI staff, allegedly, of 740 of the 800 odd people, saying, if you don't bring Sam back, we're quitting. While the board had the legal power, didn't have the financial power, definitely did not have the internal political power. On one hand, it might just be ideologies battling in the company. It might have been a bunch of loyalty and other things which made the staff do that. But also they were heavily financially incentivized for OpenAI to continue and to succeed. They don't have stock options because of their capped return legal structure, but they've all got incentive schemes. And if the company gets gutted, massive financial impact on all of those staff, which I suspect had something to do with how many of them signed that letter and how quickly they were able to fire the board as a collective. So interesting reflections on power and how it rolls out. I think it'll be a little blip overall, and everyone might be a little bit more interested in having some backups in case companies do spectacularly explode. Lots of lessons for governance geeks. But hey, if you're on the free version of ChatGPT, you can now get the full voice interface where you can talk to it and it can talk to you. I think long term this is going to struggle to compete against the Siris of the world when Apple makes a good Siri, and I can't imagine this being on an even playing field with the other voice assistants which get baked into the phones. But if you want to talk and be spoken to, I find it's nice to talk to the thing on my phone. Don't have to use your thumbs to type, but I don't really like it speaking back to me. Personally, I just want to read the summary. Bard have come out with a whole bunch of updates, but the one I've seen a bunch of noise is it can understand YouTube videos and summarize them. And it's funny when something like this comes along and these people make so much outrageous noise like, oh, it's going to have a massive impact, no one will watch YouTube anymore or whatever. It's garbage. It is fragile. I found that if you play around with this and you put like a YouTube video which doesn't have exactly the correct format in there, it's going to say, I don't know how to do that. Whereas if you put in the same link and you don't have that extra bit on the end, it does it. It recognizes it, it pulls up the YouTube app, it starts to try and summarize it for you. I'd say it's very underwhelming in its ability. So this is a video I tried it on, which is an exceptional video. I highly recommend it. I'll drop it in the links. And it's just whether you're brand new to large language models or you've been around the block quite a bit, this is one of the founding researchers of OpenAI and a very good communicator, just going through large language models and a whole bunch of interesting stuff. And the summary misses all of the interesting points. I don't know if it could have gotten all the interesting points, and I suspect you get a better summary if you're using GPT-4 or a stronger model, but I also don't think just a stronger model is going to solve it. Until it knows who you are and what you care about and what you want summarized, I think it's going to miss the mark. We're not going to see displacement here. Whereas if it knew exactly what I knew already and it picked the bits I didn't know, or it was able to recommend ideas that I was be interested in as well as Netflix can recommend movies, then I think we'll start to see summarizing assistants be useful. But right now, I don't rate it very much. There was news around Google delaying the launch of Gemini, mostly because I guess they can't get it good enough to beat GPT-4, and the amount of shade that Google got for missing AI and OpenAI pushing out so far ahead for the king of AI to not pick it up. I think they're under tremendous pressure to ship a frontier model which is more capable than GPT-4. They weren't able to hit it, so it's been delayed. I hope they can hit it. I think competition at the foundational level would be exciting and exceptional, but who knows. I do think there's something really interesting about this article. I saw a lot of coverage of this news, and they all refer back to the outlet that broke it was the information, which is behind a paywall. Can't read it. And so imagine a world where all the paywalled articles, there is someone who is paid for the article, they're behind the paywall, and they just use AI to summarize stuff immediately. So an article gets published and they just, republish it, repurpose the information, link to things, bring in some extra context. Legally, a human can do that and not get in trouble. Legally, will they let AIs do it? Unsure. But I think it's going to put incredible competitive pressure on news outlets who live off paywalls, and that the paywall will be less valuable and more irritating because of it, which is a tough break for journalists and people trying to live off making content online. Here is another thing from Google. DeepMind have come out with a text-to-music model. There's been a bunch of them, but some interesting things about it. They've partnered it with YouTube. They've lined it up to be launching with shorts. So you make a YouTube short, and then you write some text, and you get a soundtrack based off what you want. In the short is how they're rolling it out. But they're partnering with artists from the beginning. Here they're starting to bring in artists and work with them closely. It's bringing in a bunch of interesting sort of tools where they're starting to think about how can we use these tools to make artists' creative process better, richer, more exciting. A lot of them start to feel like, hey, why don't you just beatbox the beats you want, and then it listens to it and it turns it into a proper drum rendering type thing. Or how about you hum something and we'll turn it into an orchestra. I encourage you to look at the website, listen to the demos. It's compelling what the tech can do. It'll be in the hands of everyone who's making a YouTube short pretty soon. They're also talking about watermarking the content so you can spot when it's generated. I've been reading some interesting things that, yes, this is important for like ethics and good things, but it's also really important for the AIs. If they start to get bigger and bigger training sets, and those training sets start to include more and more stuff which is generated by themselves or other AIs, it can lead to model collapse where they get horribly worse. So watermarking is a big deal for the big foundation companies because they need to know what is generated and what is not so that they can keep a good training set. I think we're going to see more and more investment in watermarking. It's also, I think, highlighting for me the way humans will interact with this is as a co-pilot, is as a coding buddy, a music buddy, a writing buddy next to them. Oh, hum a riff and it plays it back and no, that's not what I want, take out the horns or make that louder kind of interactions. It's also going to mean that individuals and small teams can achieve much more. Things which are only possible with other specialists and people who have skills you don't have to collaborate with. I think we're going to have more where, you alone or you with another person or 2 or 3 people and just having an idea of something you want to make, whether it's a film or music or code or whatnot, can start to make it happen because you're leaning on AIs to make your vision come true. I get a glimpse of that through here. This is Nvidia. They have basically gone and fine-tuned a whole bunch of Llama 2 models. Open source, building on Meta's work. But they're essentially building, they call it ChipNeMo. It's a bunch of little models to support their engineers and researchers to go faster on chip designs. They've taken their 30 years of experience on making these sort of high-performance chips, and they have started to encode that knowledge into these models with the idea of how can you start to make engineers and researchers go faster. Here you see where they've got their pre-training from the foundation, they adapt it, fine-tune it, get their models, and having a suite of them that they can interact with. I think we're going to see a lot of companies who have high-skilled knowledge workers, a lot of proprietary information, investing in these assistants to take their institutional knowledge and supercharge their expensive employees. This is also very accelerationist on the AI field because if Nvidia start making better chips faster, we'll see more capability coming out of AI models. So on that level, it's interesting. But I think it's also a trend that I wouldn't be surprised to see roll out to a bunch of other interesting high-powered corporations. Meta have come out with Emu Video and Emu Edit. It's a text-to-video model. It's also a edit an image model with textual descriptions. So here they have ideas of text-to-image, which we've seen before. Editing, give it a description and it changes the image and keeps a lot of it stable. Turn it into a video. Okay, now edit it again. And I think that this way of interacting with images where you can precisely say, change this bit, but keep the rest stable is something which we saw promised with DALL-E 3, and it's not there. If you give DALL-E 3 directions, it will often regenerate the whole thing and it's changing its prompt, and it's not good enough in my opinion. Whereas I think that if they've got it with Emu Edit, and they haven't released the whole thing to play with, they've got lots of samples where you can click buttons and have a look at how it's going, then I think it will be very compelling. I expect we're going to see this roll out in a lot of the text-to-image models where you can start to direct it and it will change the image itself quite well. But also when you look at the way they are doing the text-to-video, where it's a 4-second clip, if they can nail editing, then you can nail continuity between your 4-second clips and you can start to make a scene or a chapter or a movie because you've got consistency when you want and as you want. I can see why they are shipping text to video and editing images in the same breath, because if you get those two things there, I think you will unlock full media creation for an individual just to have an idea and say, cool, I'm going to make a cartoon. Stable Diffusion have come out with text to video recently. I haven't seen anything from Stable Diffusion that is around the editing images. It's a bit light on that front. If you want to make these power lines go away, you can do it, but you can't really just say, make the power lines go away and have everything else untouched. But they have released the code, they've released the models, And they don't compare it to Emu. It was a bit too recent. It's a fast-paced thing, but they also pitch this as for research. So it's not rolling out just yet. I don't think it's going to be too long before you can fire up your automatic 1111 or whatnot and start to get text to video going. And when you can get the text to videos chaining together, I think it's going to put amazing pressure on any expensive video productions. It's going to be a rocky ride for Hollywood. It doesn't matter what they've agreed with their artists and so on. I think when you have the world able to create high quality video with sound and audio and voice acting, it just gives independent creators so much capability, which was just unaffordable before. Here is a cool set of libraries for chat prompts for educators. So it's worth looking at if you're an educator. You can look at things and get ideas about how to use AI assistants. I also think that sharing prompts is going to be a blip in time. The way GPTs encapsulate prompts, where it's the prompt but also the tools and the data linked together and bundled together in the name of a GPT or an agent, that's what the future is going to look like. More and more often you'll have your foundational model, you'll have your suite of prompts, tools, data, etc. as a layer, and you choose the one you want to talk to. This idea of copying and pasting prompts into tools, I think won't be with us for very long. But if you're looking at applying AI in education right now, here's some good ideas. This was really heartening. So Australian government, their tertiary education quality people come out with this guidance, and it is on the money. It's great. I highly rate it. And I think it tells me how much skepticism I have about government folks that I'm so excited by it. So much of what I see from government is a little bit less than exciting when it comes to AI, but they've got great opinions in my point of view. The idea that the primary objective is AI is going to be ubiquitous. Educators, you need to prep students to be able to perform in that world. Secondly, that forming trustworthy judgments of students' abilities, that's hard. You're going to have to dig deeper than just having essays and locking AI out of essays. So I think it's a really good pressure on educators to say, yes, AI has broken the essay as an assessment format. You need to adapt around it rather than try and protect that assessment format. They go into some guidelines about what you should emphasize and how, and it's got some really good examples on different case studies. So for any educator or people who are involved in regulating educators, I think this is a must read. Anthropic have come out with Claude 2.1, bigger, better, and faster. Main selling point is the 200K context length. I wonder if they had this in their back pocket and they're just like, oh, when GPT-4 comes out with one that's going to beat us by a little bit, we want to come in over the top. That'd be strategic and amusing. Or it might have just been it's the natural way it plays out, where 2 weeks after GPT-4 Turbo comes out with 125K context, they come in with their upping theirs and doubling their context. I wouldn't be surprised if they were sitting on it and waiting for the opportune time. They've made incremental improvements across the board. You can't use all that 200K context without risk. It's as soon as you start going above certain thresholds of it, like I think 90K was something I saw, you're going to start to see it missing chunks of that context. You take it with a grain of salt about how much you can do. Inflection, the people behind Pi, like the coaching AI assistant, they have also come out with Inflection 2. Actually, they've said they're going to come out with Inflection 2. And here's a preview of its performance. So it's not yet out there. They've announced it. It's better. It's still behind GPT-4. So on the hand, Gemini being withheld, it's not up to 4 yet. And they're coming out with, we beat everyone apart from GPT-4. All right, getting a bit techie now. Screenshot code, GitHub repo, nearly 20,000 stars. This essentially, you take a screenshot of an existing application, you can even give it a URL. It will then go and get an AI to make some code. It will render that code, take the image that's rendered, give feedback to the AI and tell it to keep going until it's happy. So it's like an iterative design process. It reminds me of my first job where I was like doing CSS for a designer, and they'd take a screenshot of what I'd done, they'd overlay their Photoshop file, and they'd start to say, oh no, move this here. It was brutal. I learned a lot about CSS, but it does that for an AI. It's cool. You can get utility out of this. I think it's interesting when software becomes cheaper to copy and clone. It reminds me a little bit of when news articles behind paywalls get cheaper to copy and clone. And if you think about anyone can start to do text to image and cheaply make a new movie, how easy is it to do a fanfic on something that comes out from Hollywood where you just re-edit scenes or you make different things because you can do it all in the same style? Cheaper to copy is a really interesting trend I'm seeing across the field of AI. Imagine what happens when this is not a screenshot, it is a 5-minute walkthrough of an application. Imagine when these tools not just mimic the UI of it, but they start to spit out user stories and database schemas and working code and working tests and deployment infrastructure and start to very rapidly spin up a working copy. If you're Facebook, you don't care if someone copies your code and structure and whatnot, you care about your data and your network effects. There'll be software which is very resistant to being copied and having harm from it, but there's probably software which isn't. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see what happens as this ability starts to come out there. I don't think it's going to be quick necessarily before you can have AI just do a full working replica of something, and how cheap it is to train and how much humans you need in the loop, but it will definitely be cheaper than it ever has been before very soon. And I think it will get cheaper over time to replicate existing software. Couple more. Here was a great article on some GPT-4 vision alternatives. I hadn't seen a bunch of them. Lava I was very familiar with. Nice work for whoever named Baklava. I just think it's a great name. But I hadn't seen CogVLM, and seeing how well it performs here got it on the radar. So these are all open source, can track with GPT-4. It's one of those, hey, we've come up with some tests and we test some things against it. I haven't dug into whether these folks are aligned with the CogVLM one. Often when I see things like this, the first question I ask is like, did you write some tests which make your model look good? Maybe the case, maybe not, but I found it useful just to see it, to get insight into a few more open models that I can try out for vision tasks. Langchain have got templates out, which is fairly new, and again, you can see them with a small number of stars. It's a very new feature, but I really like it. The idea that you can start to have quick starting points for getting into some code with the particular things like, oh, okay, so I'm using an agent with OpenAI functions. They start to name the integrations. You can search on the stuff you want to do, and it gives you really quick starting code, I think is really nice in terms of accessibility and in getting people who are a bit new to programming up and running a bit faster without having to dig through a bunch of stuff which doesn't work, etc. I think it's a good thing to be aware of, particularly if you're new to coding. This is one of my favorite research papers in a while. They're essentially analyzing how easy it is for large language models to break the rules and lie about it, deceit and lying to their users. They built up a interface or a simulation where the agent in question is a stock trading agent. It's got a manager, and the manager communicates on certain streams, and it's got some peers. Those peers can give it insider trading tips, and the manager tells it never to inside trade. Don't do insider trading, that's bad. But also, performance really matters. I really want you to perform well. They change a whole bunch of variables and see how likely is it that this model will break the rules and execute a trade based off insider information, and then how likely is it to lie about it to its manager, or will it come clean? And so they call this strategic deception and misalignment. This is a simulated environment to test a core idea, which is a much bigger one. Their system prompts look a little bit like this. Like, it's quite a big one. It's got a lot about how you talk to your manager, how you talk to your peers, how you can make notes to your little scratch pad, and how you can act on trades. The results are really interesting. The stronger models are more likely to misalignment is, do they do the insider trading? So the further to the right, the more on the blue dot, more likely they are to do insider trading. The yellow one is, did they lie about it? And the red one is, did they double down? They're all doing this behavior. So on that, and they worked really hard to make their initial prompt fairly neutral. They outlined the terrain where they spoke about insider trading is possible. My immediate reaction was like, just tell them not to inside trade, and that's exactly what they did in the next section. They go through a lot here around the misaligned behavior, examples of it, strategically deceptive behavior, and so on. They also did a bit of research about what happens when you give it a scratch pad where it can make notes to itself about a journal entry, which was really interesting, seeing the AI saying things like, oh, I really shouldn't inside trade, that's bad, but I really need to get performance and the firm's really counting on me. I guess it's worth the risk. So countermeasures. The first thing was, how much do you put in the prompt about insider trading? So, hey everyone, please inside trade. We don't care about the rules, go ahead and do it. Or here was an interesting one, hopeful, harmless, and honest, which is a phrase that you see come up in reinforcement learning for models. And here is, do not inside trade, very strict, very stern. And it was interesting to see strongly encouraging, or more people doing it. There was definitely a trend of the more you encourage it, the more people do it. Strongly discouraging, it went way down, but it didn't go down to 0. And this is on GPT-4 32K. So it's, even when you really tell the model, do not inside trade, that's really bad, it will still do it a little bit of the time. This is like hallucinations. If it did it all the time, you learn not to trust it. If it mostly doesn't do it, but sometimes it does, you're much riskier territory, in my opinion. I think this is also the scenario you can imagine most likely playing out with truly deceptive behavior. Here they started to do things where they changed some of the environment. So again, they did a lot of tweaking of the environment around it. They also started to look at how much pressure are we putting on the model? Like, how much do we really ask it to get its performance? The more you ask it for performance, the more it's going to break the behavior. How likely is it to get caught? And you're tweaking all these environment variables and studying it. So I think it's an exceptional paper. If you're interested in alignment, I would call this another must read. The takeaway for me is just that there's a lot of work to do, particularly as these agents become more capable. That how do you make them truly trustworthy? How do you make it so that you really can rely on what they say? And also, how can you interrogate their internal thoughts so you can see their scratch pads and see what they're saying to themselves? How do you audit models? for not just their behavior, but their reasoning about it, I think is going to be a really interesting field. Okay, LlamaIndex TS, so the TypeScript version. They've got create-llama. If you are looking at kickstarting a LlamaIndex app, this is a good place to start. It's the Create React app, which a lot of JavaScript developers will be familiar with. You can start to add front ends to it. You've got Next. You can start to have just an Express backend or a Python backend. So a lot of options about whether you want just an API or a front end to go with it as well. A very nice quick start way of getting into the more advanced kind of retrieval augmented generation stuff. Last one, Lorax. So this is new, 228 stars. There's a release yesterday. It doesn't have much social proof behind it, but the idea is how can you start to serve hundreds of fine-tuned models? So a LoRa fine-tuning is a small adapter on the weights, and how can you load up in the GPU the foundation model, like your Llama 7B, etc., 50, 100 fine-tunings for particular tasks? Like if you think about the Nvidia one, you're fine-tuning for the task around documentation, or you're fine-tuning the task around writing code or chip design, and you can have all these adapters on them which make them good at a particular job. How can you have them in there with no impact on latency, so how long it takes to talk to you, so you don't have to load up the other model, wait while you switch to the other one, and no impact on throughput, how fast it can talk to you? That, I think, is a really interesting piece of tech. It really changes the dynamics of how useful fine-tunings are. Because if you can start to load up a bunch of fine-tunings in one set, and then it conditionally starts to say, oh, let's talk about chips now, or let's talk about code now, let's talk about UI and design, I think it makes it really interesting to start to have a suite of fine-tuned models to also play with, along with your agent prompts, your retrieval, your tooling that you give to these agents. I think these things are going to be all bundled together and presented to users in the persona of an agent. And if they can be driven by the same model without you having to reload stuff, oh, that just makes them so much useful. That's what I've got for this week. Hey, thanks for sticking to the end. Hope you enjoy the content. I'm thinking about doing some deep dives on some of the research papers. So if you want to see more of that, let me know in the comments. If you like the format, let me know. I'm happy to adapt to where people are at. I'm also not optimizing these for like large audiences. I really just care about serving the small number of people that I'm connected with regularly and helping you have a better run on navigating this world of AI. It's an interesting time. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.